She forced the black maid to eat dog food. Then the billionaire walked in. Hey, stop scrolling for a second. I wasn't going to tell this story, but I can't stop thinking about it. This happened in a mansion in Georgia, in front of a room full of powerful people who didn't think a woman kneeling on marble floor, eating out of a dog bowl, was worth their attention. Nobody in that room knew who she really was. Nobody knew what was coming through that front door in the next 60 seconds. By the time it was over, the woman in the peach gown was on her knees too, but for a very different reason. Stay with me, because this story is about to change how you see people forever. Welcome back, everyone, to the channel. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you belong to? Drop in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Today's story is one of the most emotional, most talked about stories I've ever told on this channel. A story about dignity, about being underestimated, and about a truth so powerful it silenced an entire ballroom. I promise you, you will not see the twist coming. Let's get into it. She thought she was the lowest person in that house. She had no idea she was the reason the house still stood. Her name was Maribel Johnson, and for 11 years she had scrubbed the marble floors of the Whitfield estate in Buckhead, Atlanta. 11 years of waking up at 4:30 in the morning, riding 2 buses across the city, and stepping quietly through the servants' entrance before the sun even touched the iron gates. She had raised 2 children on a maid salary. Her husband had passed 6 years earlier from a heart attack he never told her he was having because he didn't want her to worry. Since then, it had just been her son Malik, and her daughter Aaliyah, who was 17 and dreaming of becoming a nurse. Maribel didn't complain. She had learned a long time ago that complaining didn't put food on the table. What put food on the table was showing up. Every single day, rain or shine, holiday or heartbreak, she showed up at the Whitfield estate, and she did her job better than anyone else on staff. The head housekeeper, an older woman named Dolores, used to say, Maribel could clean a hurricane and make it look like nothing happened. It wasn't a joke. It was true. The Whitfield family had built their fortune in real estate 3 generations back, and by the time Victoria Whitfield married into the name, the estate had grown into something closer to a museum than a home. 12 bedrooms, a ballroom with hand-painted ceilings, a wine cellar older than the state of Georgia itself. Victoria wore that wealth like armor. She had grown up with money, married into more of it, and somewhere along the way had convinced herself that the people who cleaned her floors and cooked her meals were simply part of the furniture, necessary, replaceable, and beneath conversation. Victoria's husband, Richard Whitfield, was different. Quiet, distracted. He traveled constantly for business, and when he was home, he mostly kept to his study, buried in phone calls and spreadsheets. The staff liked him well enough, mostly because he left them alone. Victoria was the one who ran the house, and ran it the way a drill sergeant runs a boot camp. That particular Friday, the Whitfield estate was being prepared for the biggest event of the year, a charity gala for the Whitfield Family Foundation, an event that would draw 200 of Atlanta's wealthiest people, 3 local news crews, and, though nobody on staff knew it yet, someone whose presence would change everything. Maribel had been at the house since 5 that morning, polishing silver, steaming linens, arranging the ballroom chairs in perfect rows. She hadn't stopped moving in 9 hours. Around 2 in the afternoon, exhausted and lightheaded from skipping lunch, she made the mistake that would set the whole evening into motion. She was carrying a tray of imported crystal glasses through the west hallway when her foot caught the edge of a rug that had been laid down for the event. The tray tipped. 6 glasses shattered against the marble floor, each one worth more than Maribel made in a week. Victoria's voice cracked through the hallway like a whip before Maribel had even finished catching her balance. Are you serious right now? Maribel dropped to her knees immediately, already gathering the shattered glass with her bare hands, murmuring apologies. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll clean it right up. I'll pay for it. Victoria let out a short, cruel laugh. With what, exactly? A small crowd of catering staff had started to gather at the edge of the hallway, the way people do when they sense something is about to happen. Maribel kept her head down, kept cleaning, kept apologizing. But Victoria wasn't finished. Something about the stress of the gala, the pressure of impressing 200 guests, had turned into something ugly, and Maribel, kneeling, quiet, powerless, had become the target. "You people," Victoria said, her voice rising, "come into my home, and you can't even carry a tray without destroying thousands of dollars of property." Victoria. A man's voice, low and warning, came from the top of the staircase. It was Marcus Chun, the estate's event coordinator, someone Maribel had always found kind. But Victoria didn't even turn her head. "I am so tired," Victoria said, stepping closer to Maribel, "of people who don't respect what they've been given. You know what? Since you clearly don't value anything in this house," she gestured toward the small side room off the kitchen where the Whitfield family's 2 Rottweilers were fed, "maybe you'd understand the value of things a little better if you knew what it felt like to be given exactly what you deserve." The room went quiet. Even the caterers stopped moving. "Victoria," Marcus said again, sharper this time, "that's enough." But Victoria wasn't done. She marched to the small feeding room, grabbed the stainless steel bowl the dogs ate from, and, in front of the caterers, in front of Marcus, in front of God and everyone, set it down in the middle of the hallway floor, still half full of kibble, and pointed at it. "Eat," she said. Maribel's whole body went cold. For 11 years she had absorbed every insult, every dismissive glance, every moment Victoria Whitfield made her feel small, because she needed this job, because Aaliyah's nursing school tuition was due in September, because dignity doesn't pay rent. She looked up at Victoria's face, twisted with a kind of anger that had nothing to do with 6 broken glasses, and she understood, in that moment, that this woman had been waiting for an excuse. "Ma'am, please," Maribel whispered. "I have children." "I said eat." And slowly, with tears sliding silently down her face, refusing to give Victoria the satisfaction of a scene, Maribel Johnson knelt down on the marble floor of the Whitfield estate and reached toward the bowl. That was the exact moment the front doors of the mansion swung open. He had been gone 3 years. Nobody in that hallway knew he was about to walk back into their lives. The man who stepped through the doorway was tall, dressed simply in a dark suit with no tie, carrying himself with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need an announcement. Marcus Chun, standing at the top of the staircase, felt his stomach drop the second he saw him. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered. The man's name was Daniel Whitfield, Richard's younger brother. The one member of the Whitfield family who had walked away from the family business 7 years earlier after a bitter falling out with his father over, of all things, how the company treated its workers. Daniel had taken his share of an early inheritance, moved to Seattle, and built his own technology company from nothing. Nobody at that gala, nobody in that hallway, none of the caterers or waitstaff scrambling to set up chairs, had any idea that in the 3 years since anyone in the family had seen him, Daniel Whitfield had quietly become worth more than the entire Whitfield real estate empire combined. He had returned to Atlanta only once in those 3 years, for his father's funeral, and had left the same night without speaking to Victoria at all. He had come back today for one reason. Richard had begged him for weeks to attend the gala and help rebuild bridges within the family. Daniel had almost said no. He was glad, now, more than he could have imagined, that he hadn't. He stopped in the doorway and took in the scene. Maribel Johnson, on her knees, tears on her face, reaching toward a dog bowl. Victoria standing over her, arms still extended in command. A hallway full of staff frozen in place, too afraid to intervene. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The chandelier above them cast a strange golden light over the entire scene, and it felt, Marcus would later say, like time itself had stopped. "Maribel," Daniel said quietly. "Don't." Maribel froze, her hand inches from the bowl. She looked up, and something in her face shifted from humiliation to disbelief. Mr. Daniel, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Victoria spun around, and for the first time since anyone could remember, the color drained from her face. Daniel, I didn't know you were. We weren't expecting. Clearly, Daniel said, his eyes never leaving Maribel. He crossed the hallway in a few quick strides and knelt down beside her, not caring in the slightest about the $2,000 suit he was wearing. He picked up the dog bowl himself and set it aside, then gently helped Maribel to her feet. Are you hurt? He asked her, his voice softer now, almost fragile. Maribel shook her head, still stunned, still trying to understand what she was seeing. Mr. Daniel, you know me? Know you. Daniel let out a small, disbelieving laugh, though there was no humor in it. Maribel, you took care of my mother for the last 2 years of her life. You sat with her every single night after your shift ended, off the clock because she couldn't sleep and she was scared, and none of us were there. You held her hand the night she died because I was 3,000 miles away and Richard was on a business call, and Victoria, his eyes cut to his sister-in-law, Victoria was at a fundraiser. The hallway had gone so silent that Marcus swore he could hear his own heartbeat. I remember you, Daniel continued, turning back to Maribel, his voice thick with something that sounded dangerously close to tears. I remember your face at that funeral. You were the only person outside the family who cried. Actually cried. Not for the cameras. Not for appearances. Because you loved her. Victoria's mouth opened and closed. No sound coming out. Daniel, she finally managed. She broke 6 crystal glasses. They were imported. I was simply trying to teach a lesson about. About what, Victoria? Daniel's voice was still quiet, but it had an edge to it now that made everyone in the room take an involuntary step back. About value? About what's replaceable and what isn't. He gestured toward the shattered glass still scattered across the marble floor. Those glasses can be replaced with a phone call and a credit card. Do you know what can't be replaced? Victoria said nothing. A person's dignity, Daniel said. Once you take that from someone, Victoria, you don't get it back with an apology. Richard appeared at the top of the stairs at that moment, drawn by the commotion, and stopped dead when he saw his brother standing in the front hallway, Maribel Johnson's hand still gently held in his. Daniel? Richard said, stunned. I thought you weren't coming until the reception. I came early, Daniel said, not taking his eyes off his brother. Good thing I did. Richard's eyes moved from his brother, to his wife, to the broken glass, to the dog bowl still sitting on the floor, and understanding dawned across his face, with visible horror. Victoria, what did you do? Richard, I can explain. I don't think you can, Daniel said. But I think there's something you all should know before this gala starts tonight. Something none of you know. Something that's going to make tonight very, very interesting. He turned to Marcus, who was still standing frozen on the staircase. Marcus, can you have Maribel taken somewhere to clean up, get something to eat, real food, and then bring her to the ballroom before the guests arrive? I need her there tonight. Marcus nodded quickly, moving to help Maribel. Victoria found her voice again, panic creeping into it now. Daniel, what are you talking about? Why would she be at the gala? She's staff, she's not a guest, Daniel said, and for the first time, something like a smile, cold, controlled, crossed his face. You might want to sit down for this one, Victoria, because in about 6 hours, this entire family is going to find out exactly who Maribel Johnson really is. And I promise you, it is not who you think. Nobody in that ballroom knew a single letter had been signed a decade ago, a letter that was about to rewrite everything. By 7 o'clock that evening, the Whitfield ballroom had transformed into the kind of scene you'd expect to see on the cover of a lifestyle magazine. Crystal chandeliers glowing above 200 of Atlanta's wealthiest guests, a live string quartet playing near the marble staircase, waiters gliding between tables with trays of champagne. Victoria Whitfield stood near the entrance in her peach gown, greeting guests with a smile so practiced it looked almost real, though anyone who looked closely would have noticed her hands trembling slightly as she held her glass. Maribel Johnson sat at a small table near the back of the ballroom, wearing a simple navy dress that Marcus had found for her from a boutique 3 blocks away, her hair freshly done, a plate of untouched food in front of her. She had spent the last 4 hours in a state of complete disorientation, unsure why Daniel Whitfield had insisted she stay, unsure why she'd been given a seat instead of an apron, unsure of anything except the strange, quiet kindness in his eyes when he'd knelt beside her on that marble floor. At exactly 7:45, Daniel Whitfield walked to the small stage at the front of the ballroom, where a microphone had been set up for the evening's opening remarks. The room quieted as he adjusted the mic, and Victoria, standing near the back, felt her stomach twist into a knot she couldn't explain. "Good evening, everyone," Daniel began, his voice warm and steady, carrying easily through the ballroom. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support the Whitfield Family Foundation. Before we get into the formal program, I want to tell you a story. It's not the story I planned to tell tonight, but after what I witnessed in this house a few hours ago, I think it's exactly the story this family needs to hear." A ripple of curious murmurs moved through the crowd. Victoria's champagne glass trembled visibly in her hand. 10 years ago," Daniel continued, "my mother, Eleanor Whitfield, was diagnosed with early-onset dementia. Most of you knew her as a gracious hostess, a brilliant woman who ran this family's charitable giving for decades. What most of you didn't know is how frightened she was in her final years. How confused. How alone she often felt in a house full of people who were too busy to notice." He paused, letting the words settle. There was one person who noticed. One person who, every single night after her 12-hour shift ended, would sit with my mother, off the clock, unpaid, simply because she couldn't bear the thought of an elderly woman being scared and alone. That person read to her, sang to her when she couldn't remember her own children's names, held her hand through nightmares. And when my mother passed 3 years ago, that same person was the one who closed her eyes because none of us, her own family, made it in time. Victoria's face had gone the color of chalk. Richard, standing beside her, looked physically ill. "That person," Daniel said, his eyes finding Maribel across the room, "is Maribel Johnson. And this afternoon, in the front hallway of this very house, I watched my sister-in-law force her to kneel on the floor and eat from a dog bowl because she broke 6 crystal glasses." A collective gasp moved through the ballroom like a wave. Every head turned toward Victoria, whose composed smile had completely dissolved. "Daniel, please," Victoria said, her voice small, barely audible even in the sudden silence. "Not here." "You didn't think about that this afternoon," Daniel said, not unkindly but not softening either. "You didn't think about dignity, or respect, or the 11 years this woman has given this family when you were standing over her demanding she humiliate herself in front of a room full of people. So I think it's only fair that this family understands, in front of a room full of people, exactly who she is." He turned back to the crowd, his voice steadying. "What most of you also don't know is that 6 years ago, my mother rewrote her will. Quietly. Without telling anyone in this family, including me, until after her death. In her final year, in one of her clearer moments, she asked her attorney to add a provision, a trust, set up specifically for Maribel Johnson and her children, funded not from the family estate, but from my mother's personal investment portfolio, which she had built independently over 40 years and which, as of this year, had grown to just over $4 million. The room went completely silent. Somewhere near the back, a waiter dropped a tray, and nobody even turned to look. Maribel's hand flew to her mouth. Tears were streaming down her face now, and she wasn't trying to hide them anymore. "I found out about this trust 2 months ago," Daniel continued, "when the attorney finally reached me to finalize the transfer, which had been delayed due to some legal complications my mother hadn't anticipated. I was planning to tell Maribel privately, quietly, in a way that respected her and didn't turn her private blessing into a spectacle. But after what happened in that hallway today, I've decided this family needs a public reminder of exactly who has been treated as disposable in this house, and exactly what kind of heart that disposable person actually has. He looked directly at Victoria now, and his voice, though still calm, carried a weight that silenced any thought of interruption. Maribel Johnson isn't just an employee of this family, Victoria. She's about to become one of the wealthiest women in this room. And more importantly than that, she's a better human being than most of the people standing in it, myself included, most days. Victoria's legs seemed to give out slightly, and Richard reached to steady her, his face a mixture of shame and disbelief. Daniel turned back to Maribel, extending his hand toward the small stage. Maribel, would you come up here for a moment? Maribel sat frozen for several seconds, overwhelmed, disoriented, every eye in the ballroom now fixed on her. Slowly, shakily, she rose from her chair and made her way toward the stage, the room parting for her like she was walking down an aisle rather than across a ballroom floor. What Maribel said next silenced a room full of millionaires, and it wasn't about the money at all. Maribel Johnson stood at the front of the Whitfield Ballroom, facing 200 of the wealthiest people in Atlanta, her hands trembling, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Daniel gently guided her to the microphone and stepped back, giving her the floor. For a long moment, she said nothing. She looked out over the crowd, the diamonds, the tailored suits, the faces she recognized from 11 years of serving them dinner and never once being asked how her own children were doing, and something in her chest finally broke open. I don't know what to say, she began, her voice shaking. I've cleaned this house for 11 years. I know every crack in this marble floor. I know which chandelier bulb always burns out first. I know this house better than I know my own apartment, because I've spent more hours here than there. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, quickly silenced by the seriousness in her voice. This afternoon, I was on my knees on that floor, about to eat out of a dog bowl, because I was told that's what I deserved. And you know what I was thinking in that moment? I wasn't thinking about the money I needed for my daughter's nursing school. I wasn't thinking about how tired I was, or how humiliated. I was thinking about my mother. She used to tell me, "Baby, they can take your job, they can take your paycheck, but nobody can take your dignity unless you hand it to them yourself." And I made a decision, kneeling on that floor, that I wasn't going to hand mine over. I was going to survive that moment with my head held as high as I could manage. That's all I had left to hold on to. She paused, wiping her eyes, and looked toward Daniel. I loved Mrs. Eleanor like she was my own mother. I never once sat with her because I wanted anything from her. I sat with her because she was scared and lonely, and nobody deserves to feel that way, especially not at the end of their life. If I had known she was leaving me anything, I promise you, I would have told her not to. That's not why I did it. She turned back to the crowd, and something in her voice hardened slightly, though it never lost its warmth. I want everyone in this room to understand something. There are people who clean your houses, who watch your children, who serve your dinners, who you walk past every single day without learning their names. Every one of them has a mother who loved them. Every one of them has dreams for their children, same as you do for yours. Every one of them is one bad day, one moment of cruelty away from being broken, and one moment of kindness away from remembering they still matter. She looked directly at Victoria now, who stood near the back of the room, visibly shaking, tears streaking through her makeup. Mrs. Whitfield, Maribel said gently, I'm not going to stand up here and humiliate you the way I was humiliated today. That's not who I am, and it's not who Mrs. Eleanor raised me to be, even though she wasn't my mother by blood. I forgive you, not because what you did was okay, it wasn't, but because carrying anger is heavier than carrying grace, and I've carried enough heavy things in my life already. A sound rippled through the crowd, some people crying openly now, others simply staring, stunned into silence by the grace radiating from a woman they had walked past 100 times without a second glance. Victoria broke down completely, sinking into a nearby chair, her husband's hand on her shoulder, her face buried in her hands. Daniel stepped back up to the microphone, his own eyes glistening. "There's one more thing," he said. "Maribel, the trust my mother set up isn't just for you. It's structured to also fully fund Aaliyah's nursing education and Malik's, whatever path he chooses. My mother thought of everything, even from a hospital bed, even when her memory was failing her in almost every other way. She never forgot what you did for her." Maribel's knees nearly buckled, and Marcus rushed forward to steady her. "But I also want to announce something new tonight," Daniel continued, turning to the crowd. "Effective immediately, I'm establishing the Eleanor Whitfield Dignity Fund, in my mother's name, a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships, healthcare support, and emergency assistance to domestic workers and caregivers across Georgia, the people who spend their lives caring for our families and are so often invisible to us. I'm personally funding it with an initial $2 million, and I'm asking Maribel Johnson, if she's willing, to serve as its founding director." The ballroom erupted into applause, genuine, overwhelming applause, the kind that comes not from politeness, but from something cracking open in 200 hearts at once. Maribel stood at that microphone, tears streaming freely now, looking out at a sea of faces that, for the first time in 11 years, actually saw her. 6 months later, the same marble hallway looked completely different, and so did everyone standing in it. 6 months after that gala, the front hallway of the Whitfield estate looked much the same marble floor, the same chandelier, the same iron gates outside. But everything about what happened inside that house had changed. Maribel Johnson no longer wore a maid's uniform. She walked through that hallway now in a simple blazer, carrying a leather folder instead of a cleaning cart, on her way to a meeting in what used to be Richard Whitfield's study, now converted into the headquarters of the Eleanor Whitfield Dignity Fund. In just 6 months, the foundation had raised an additional $3 million from donors across Atlanta, many of them guests who had been in that ballroom the night everything changed, and had already provided emergency medical assistance to over 200 domestic workers and caregivers across the state, plus full scholarships for 11 children of household staff, including Maribel's own daughter, Aaliyah, who had started her first semester of nursing school that fall with her. Tuition paid in full. Malik, Maribel's son, had taken an internship at Daniel's tech company in Atlanta's new downtown office, something he never could have imagined a year earlier. And Victoria Whitfield, after weeks of what she later described as the hardest soul-searching of her life, had personally requested to volunteer with the foundation. Not as a donor writing a check from a distance, but hands-on, sorting intake paperwork, sitting with families in crisis, learning names she had never bothered to learn before. It wasn't a grand redemption arc, not overnight. Some days she still caught herself falling into old patterns of impatience, old habits of looking past people instead of at them. But she was trying, in a way that felt real, and Maribel, who had every right to hold on to her anger, chose, day after day, to give her the space to grow. "I used to think dignity was something you were born with, or something money could buy," Victoria said, in an interview with a local news station covering the foundation's first 6 months. "I learned on my knees, apologizing to a woman I should have respected from day one, that dignity is something you either give to people, or you take from them. I spent years taking it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to give it back." As for Maribel, she still visits Eleanor Whitfield's grave every month, the way she has for 3 years, bringing fresh flowers, sitting quietly for a while before she leaves. "She used to tell me that love doesn't ask permission before it shows up," Maribel said, in that same interview. "I loved her because she needed love, not because I thought it would come back to me like this. But I think that's exactly why it did." If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this. The way you treat people who can do nothing for you says everything about who you really are. Kindness offered without expectation has a way of finding its way back to you in forms you could never have imagined. And dignity, real dignity, was never something anyone had the right to take from Maribel Johnson in the first place. She simply refused to hand it over. If this story moved you even a little, do something for me. Hit that like button. It truly helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here because we tell stories like this every single week. Stories about kindness, about dignity, about the quiet, invisible people who deserve to be seen. And if you know someone who needs a reminder today that they matter, that their kindness isn't going unnoticed, share this story with them. You never know whose life you might touch. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.